very warm welcome to Jason Bevan.
Hi, alle sammen. That is about the extent of my Norwegian, I'm afraid, but I did want to get a couple of words in there. So this next 25 minutes is going to be noisy. I hope it's going to be good fun. We're going to have a lot of film footage played, so if anyone was looking for a nice chilled out session, calm down, maybe have a little bit of a snooze before lunch, you're in the wrong place. But most importantly, I've had a really great opportunity to be able to work with lots of really amazing storytellers. I want to tell you a little bit about how they did it, how we did it in big movies, and most importantly, how you can do it in your own work. And hopefully, I think, come away with some hints and clear tips and techniques that you can use to apply into your own jobs and the way that you do market and sell your own products. So I'm going to kick straight off now and ask everyone in the audience, I want hands up or keep them by the sides, depending on what you decide. How many of you think you can tell a half-decent story? Come on. Good, come on. We're in the land of Scandinavia, where some of the greatest fables came from, right? So you've got some of the best storytellers of all time here. Well, I passionately believe that every single one of you have got it inside you. Why? Because we're all human beings, and right at the origins of being human beings is storytelling. Now, children are some of the best storytellers around. Why? Because the littlest ones, when they first arrive in the world, they don't know what the rules are. They don't know what the conventions are that we're all taught when we're adults. And we kind of understand what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. Children don't know that. And that's why, lo and behold, when you give them at Christmas time a really nice, expensive toy, they end up playing with the box. Why? Because that box can be a spaceship, it can be a rocket, it can take them to the moon, it can be a house that transports them to other lands. Their imaginations think openly. And as we get older and we become adults, we start to think reductively. We funnel our ideas down because we don't want to look stupid in front of other people. Children don't care, and they dream. And I love this picture, not just because of this cute little boy that's in the box, but because I kind of think it symbolizes quite a lot of what we all try and do in sales and marketing. We're trying to take boxes, we're trying to take sometimes actually not particularly interesting products, and turn them into something that is a story. We're trying to get people to imagine and believe and buy into our products and to get them over the edge. Behavioral economics has shown us very clearly on multiple occasions, time and time again, that people are not fully rational. We know that we are sometimes overcome, overwhelmingly so sometimes, with emotions and feelings. That is part of being human. And this is a really, really important point, because logic and strategy and rationale will allow you to value and buy into a point that someone or you are making. Feelings and emotions will actually get you to do something about it. And that can mean the difference between the sale or not, at scale. I'll give you an example. When we hear stories in information terms in statistical ways about what's going on, for example, the Middle East right now, look at what's happening in Gaza. Are we all more motivated and compelled to help those people when we hear that thousands of people have lost their lives in the last few days? Or are we more motivated when we hear the stories of mummies and daddies that have lost their children, and vice versa, that families that have been ripped apart, of people that have lost all of the basic human needs that we need to survive? What's more compelling out of the two of those? Telling stories is so important in business. There has never been a more important time in the age of generative AI and computers and bots and the automation of things, which is extremely important, and I know that there are lots of people telling you about the rewards and benefits of those are doing. But there has never been a time more important to be human. When you get into a call center, do you prefer talking to a bot or do you prefer talking to a human? Humanity and personality is so, so important. I've had the good fortune to work with genuinely some of the very best storytellers of all time, and to be on set with them and to brainstorm with them and hear how they work and have a little bit of an insight into how their minds work as well. Guy Ritchie, Peter Jackson, Christopher Nolan as well. Some of the storytellers I've worked with are honestly bordering on creative genius, and sometimes that can make them actually quite difficult to work with. This is Christopher Nolan here. But what is really interesting, I find, about a lot of these people is that they don't operate in some kind of magical little voodoo bubble that the rest of us can't get into. The principles and tools and techniques that they all use to tell their stories so powerfully are actually things that are really very easy and applicable to the work that we all do. So I want to give you now 6 easy tips that I want you to be able to think about and take away and apply to what you do in your area of work. Now, one of the people that I was the most privileged to be able to work with was, who's now become the legendary storyteller, Jo Rowling. One of the things that she did so powerfully was allow her characters to be able to really make that personal connection to people on a very, very personal level and make them incredibly relatable to her readers. How did she do that? It was very, very simple. When Jo created Harry Potter, she put a lot of what she was feeling, her own personality, very bravely into him. She was actually incredibly open and made herself very, very vulnerable. When she was writing Harry Potter, she was a single mum living in Edinburgh. She didn't have very much money, and she felt like a bit of an underdog. And lo and behold, Harry is an underdog hero. He's always fighting against adversity, and that's one of the biggest things that we all love about Harry Potter and why he became so popular. Her mantra is underdog heroes. She was taking herself away into the storyland of escapism and fantasy. It was a little bit of self-therapy for Jo Rowling, to be honest. And that's why so many of us also resonated. And also, on a much simpler level as well, I mean, I have also worked with Roald Dahl, who had a very similar experience. As a child, he had a very difficult upbringing. So many of his heroes as well had difficulties as children. Matilda, that I made such an impact last year as well. Certainly in my daughter's and my son's schools, they were all singing lots of songs from Matilda. It really did make quite a significant cultural impact. And he certainly built a lot of that into his heroes as well. Be clear on what identifies you as a person. As sales and marketing people, we're all so focused on our audience and connecting with the people that we're trying to speak to. Also be clear, we can often forget ourselves. What's important to us? Because when the story is personally relevant and important to you, you will unleash a whole new level of storytelling and power and emotiveness in what you're able to put in your words and your stories on paper. Then what does that mean specifically? Be a person when you're writing. Give some heart and some feeling into what you're writing so that people can connect to it before. It's putting things like, this is the kind of thing that makes us get out of bed in the morning and want to do our jobs. We were perhaps slightly worried about this. We didn't quite get this right, and you, our customers, made us think about this a little bit more. Understand you and your own company style as well as your personal style, and try and put that into your writing to be more colloquial and less formal in your style. Because when you do that, you do become a human. People like speaking to humans so much more than they do artificial intelligence and bots. Next point, where were you physically when you last came up with a good idea or came up with a good storyline? Think about where you were. I've got a quick round the room. Would anyone like to shout out physically where you were when you last came up with a half-decent creative idea? Where was that? At the beach. Where else?
At the run.
Doing a run, absolutely. Same for me as well. Now, what happens when you're doing a run? I was just talking to someone before I came on stage about this. When you're doing a run, endorphins get released into your head, and that actually helps your intellectual process. Makes you feel a lot better and happier. Anywhere else? In the car? In the kitchen? Right, where have we not said? The office. Where do we spend most of our time? The office. Where's the place that we don't come up with good ideas? There's a slight correlation. Filmmakers are absolutely brilliant about this, and of course they have the lovely luxury of being able to take people onto the film sets, which are full of colours. This is a Tim Burton film set that I've just shown you here, and he's a real master of this. And he uses his film sets to inspire people and take them onto different worlds. And filmmakers use this really to their advantage, and they allow people to be fully immersed into their environments. But I am very conscious that we all can't nip onto a Tim Burton film set when in our lunch breaks, but what we can do is get out of the office. Again, that exercise to get endorphins into our heads to make us feel a little bit better. But getting out also means looking out as well. Sometimes we have to look outside of our own industries to be able to inspire ourselves with other ideas. Changing our locations when we're telling stories allows us to be able to look at the details of the places that we're writing about. Try and get into an environment that's relevant to the story that you're telling. Because when we're a good storyteller does so much more than describing their environment. They don't just give the recipe for what you need. It allows you to actually taste what that food is going to taste like, to smell it, to be able to feel like you're actually there. And when you change your environment, it can really help you so much. We have to do a lot more than just give information to people. We have to bring it into being. That is our job as marketing people. It's to allow them to imagine what it is like to be immersed in the world that you're talking about. So, for example, if your job involves students, well, get out onto a campus. Go to a supermarket if it's FMCG. I once actually did a brainstorm with my boss at the time there, when I was working for Disney in Paris in the middle of Rock and Roller Coaster at night. And we came up with some great stuff. Certainly, when I was on the Harry Potter sets, it made a huge impact on me. And actually, when I first saw the Hogwarts Express for the first time, I suddenly realized that we should be taking all this out to our customers. And I asked if we could create a train with the movie sets inside it, bring some of the cast and the animals and the costumes and the sets and props. And when we launched it in Paris, there was a queue of 1.5 kilometers to get on board that train, and we did very well with it. But I'll give you another example, also from Harry Potter. This is the cafe that J. Rowling was in when she created Harry, this little coffee shop in Edinburgh. But much more relevantly, look where she was when she wrote, look at the context of where that cafe was. And now look at Hogwarts Castle. There's a few similarities there. So we can really understand how that power can actually permeate into the storytelling and the richness and the description that we can get out. But don't expect those same grey old walls inside your office to be able to give you lots of inspiration and richness to your storytelling. The next thing that I want to tell you about is I'm not going to go back to the real basics of the importance of trying to put pictures with your stories. We all know that as human beings, we are all so much more motivated by pictures than we are by words necessarily. But also in the age of Zooms and Teams calls and Google and all the rest of it, and this will be particularly relevant to many of you that spend a lot of time working outside of your own mother tongue languages. When you're trying to explain an idea and it's not in your own language, a picture can help so much. When you're trying to pitch your colleagues with a new idea or a story, those ideas can be really, really important and made so much more to life if you can show a picture. So quickly sketch something. Go onto Google and quickly find a picture that illustrates your idea to get people across. Because guess what happens? If you're on Zoom and people don't necessarily understand an idea, when they're not with you in the room, they're not going to stop you. They'll just let you go on. But if you can actually really put that picture in front of people, they will have a much better idea of understanding what you're talking about. And structurally, when we're working on films, we use storyboards to lay out the film before we actually make it. When you're spending a couple of $100 million on a film, we want as much as we can to be able to try and make sure that it's got a structure. Be very, very clear before you start your story, what is the action that you want to incite as a result of that story? It's very basic, but very important. What is the purpose? What feeling, what emotions do you want those people to feel by the time they've finished your story? Then you need to start by creating a clear beginning, a middle, and the end. So many stories are like that, but it does work. What has happened in the past? What do we think we can do in the future? How is that future going to look? And how you're going to be able to do that and transport them to that better future with your story. But it doesn't end there. You'll see in so many good pieces of really powerful content, and certainly in movies, there is often a trick that happens often towards the end of that story process. It's what we call the button. It's when something unsurprising happens, something that you weren't expecting, a twist in a tale, which we know is really important. No one likes to be predictable. We always like to over-deliver in our stories. Now, this is from a movie that I saw 6 months before it came out, and it really came out of nowhere. The Hangover. This is a tiny little movie that we'd spent 80 million on, which in big movie terms, I know sounds like a lot of money, but that wasn't very much. And it went on to become the biggest R-rated comedy in history. But look what happens at the end of the trailer. Suddenly Mike Tyson comes up. Out he goes. Oh my God, he's still got it. It's Mike Tyson. So what's your button? What's your punch at the end that people weren't expecting? Christopher Nolan, who I spoke about before, he was the legend of this, of these amazing twists, often, frankly, way too complicated for people. But it's really nice to have a big crescendo moment, something that people aren't expecting. Next up, hit the brave button hard. I can't give you a better example than this than Barbie last summer. I was at Warner Brothers when we signed off that film. And everything about that marketing campaign was giving you a film that you knew, you kind of had this feeling with the campaign that it was going to be something that you weren't expecting. It went against what the traditions of Barbie were all about. And that was its huge success. But the B doesn't just stand for Barbie, it also stood for bravery, because it honestly ran throughout everything that they did in that campaign was so fundamentally brave, right up to the very top of Mattel. Now, as marketeers, as brand managers in the room, you will know that putting hate next to your multi-billion-dollar global brand is extremely brave. It is the 101. We don't do it. Why would you ever put hate next to your brand? It's just... But that's exactly what they did. You can imagine the reaction to a lot of this. I mean, it was the same when I worked at Disney and they first had Buzz Lightyear up and they wanted his wings to pop out uncontrollably behind him when he saw Jessie the cowgirl for the first time. That was a blatant sexual reference. And this is Disney. They had made billions of dollars from being the Puritan family company. These were enormously brave calls. Deadpool as well, with brave superheroes, and suddenly his naked bum comes out. These were all very brave moves. And you think about it from Mattel's perspective, Barbie is their jewel in the crown. It's their most valuable brand that they sit on. And they took an enormous gamble. And I know people at Warner's were against this. And that went right up to the very top. The chief exec of Barbie even allowed Will Ferrell to completely mock him and his entire board right in the movie. So you can't accuse them of not putting their true heart and conviction into all of this. And of course, they were rewarded with the multi-billion-dollar renaissance of their dual brand. The next one's really simple, and I'm going back to Harry Potter again now. But it's all about just having fun. Yeah, I'm not going to be the first person to stand in front of you and say that we're much better at doing things when we have fun. But there really was no better example of that than Harry Potter. Why was that? Because so many of the people that were really in the top positions in these films were children. Sometimes 9 or 10 years old, and we're putting them in front of these enormously scary environments with big sets and movies and staff and lights and production equipment, very, very intimidating environments. And so we tried to make the films as family-friendly as they could be and warm and embracive as possible. So whatever age you were, you could actually perform well on camera. Because most importantly, that happiness allowed us to get into what I worked with a clinical psychologist on some of this presentation, and it allows you to get into the 80% subconscious part of your brain. And that is the part where most of the ideas come from. When we're happy, we can get into that part. There's 20% of your brain, which is the active part of your brain, which is just when you're doing emails and just trying to get through stuff on a day-to-day basis. And when we're happy, we can get into that subconscious part of our brain. It also allows us, I talked a little bit before about endorphins, but in dopamine, which is the reward drug, gets secreted into your brain when you're happy. And that is absolutely clinically proven to allow us, that shows us that we can actually perform intellectually better when dopamine's in our head. But look at the creativity that gave rise to, because it allowed not just the children to feel good, but for the grown-ups to also feel a bit more like children and let rip creatively. So encourage each other. Try hard to develop ideas in the room, to build on them, to say yes and, rather than to knock them down when you're in a room. And when you're telling a story, allow it to be a collective process and people to contribute to that story, to make it better. And in fact, on the opposite side, it's almost impossible to be creative and to tell good stories when we feel worried or under threat. And that also includes having fun with language and vernacular. He wasn't Professor Brown, he was Dumbledore. He wasn't Roger Howard. His name was Rubeus Hagrid, Hufflepuff, Gryffindor, Thestrals. She had so much fun with language. You don't appear, you apparate. And actually, on a Norwegian level, here we go, you've got your lovely opera house here. But the reason I was spinning that slide is because Tenet is a palindrome. It reads the same backwards as it does forwards. Have fun with language. Think about something for a second. I mean, if I asked you to come up with a marketing campaign for a car wash, what would you think about? Then if I asked you to pause a second and say it's no longer a car wash, it's a car spa. How does that change your ideas? See how just by changing the vernacular, the language, and the labels that we put to things can change things. And this is the last bit, which is just, you guys will know so much about this already, but really getting under the skin of your ultimate judge, your audience. We were obsessed by this in movies because, funnily enough, when you're spending a few $100 million on a movie, people want some facts and science behind it to be able to know that you're putting the money in the right place. We would test and test and test again. This is on Pokemon, and you can see here the key points of retention from Google and YouTube. Many of you will have seen these charts before, and we saw that when Pokemon was on screen and Mr. Meme, those are the key points of retention. So we really worked on that. We used to work incessantly on the chemistry between actors to look what was working and what wasn't. Look at the data, look what customers are telling you. And I know you know this, but that is the origins of a good story, to bed your story in those buttons and the things that you want, that you know people are going to respond to ground your thinking in customer thought. Because otherwise you end up with stories like this, which happened when I was on Warner Brothers. Super film, lots of big cast, brilliantly made, but it was too scary for children and it wasn't quite compelling enough for young adults. What happened, we ended up selling it to Netflix just to cover its costs because it was just falling between the cracks on the consumers. We hadn't done such a great job. So just to sum up, those 6 tips again. Number 1, bring in your own personality. Bring in the personality of that you know that your customers want to relate to, but make it personal to you as well as to them. Get out of the office, plunge and refresh yourself in the environment that you'll want to talk about in your story so that you can tell people about it, so that you can make them feel. Don't give them the ingredients again. Allow them to taste the food in your story as you're writing it. Plan it all out really carefully to make sure that you deliver a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that button, that little surprise moment they haven't thought of. Enjoy the process to release your creativity. And make sure that you enjoy the process as well as your audience enjoying it as well to perform at your best. Be brave and bold, accepting that some of the ideas that you develop may actually not necessarily always work first time, the stories that you're writing. They need adjusting, they need building in a room with other people and other points of view. And lastly, use every tool you possibly can to really understand your audience and get under their skins in every possible technique that you've got to be able to do that. Being truly creative does absolutely involve some risk. But the real danger is not in that. The real danger is in sameness. It's in bland conformity. It's in just being the same as everyone else. But ultimately, I think it's a much more positive message than that. Storytelling, being emotive, establishing a connection to people, and enjoying ourselves is good fun. We spend most of our lives working. Why wouldn't we want to enjoy that process? I think innovation and creativity and storytelling is a great way to be able to do that. So I wish you all good luck. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jason. I mean, what a life you live, first of all. But let me ask you one thing. What do you think is more important, to have a good story or a good strategy?
I would say they're one and the same thing. A good strategy is also a good story. A strategy is all about taking people, your customers, on the journey from one place to another. And I think if a strategy actually has got an emotion attached to it, which ultimately it will do if you want to convince your customers, it is, in its very nature, a good story as well.
Yeah. So, and also, I liked what you ended up with: dare to be someone, not be like everyone else. Just kind of stick out a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. And again, bravery is definitely a way to do that. But creativity and using, another thing that I didn't talk about, by the way, was also trying to get, if people look like you and they sound like you, they're probably going to come up with the same stories and ideas that you come up with. So get other people from other areas. I talked a little bit about looking outside your industry for good ideas. But that also involves bringing in people into the process that don't necessarily have the same points of view as you. I call them uninformed geniuses or naive experts. It's when people come at it with a totally different angle. And that means people from other industries, perhaps sometimes brainstorming with your customers, bringing people in from a totally that have no necessary experience of what they do. When I worked on The Dark Knight, you guys may remember the Batmobile. Christopher Nolan and Nathan Crowley developed them, designed that car from scratch. They were not car designers at all, and enabled them to create something that had no front axle and matte black paint, which was totally unlike any other car in the world. And lo and behold, within a year, all of the supercars around the world start appearing in matte black paint. So, but they did that because they weren't car designers.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you all very much for having me.